What if the devastation of the wildfires wasn't just nature's fury, but a calculated move for power and profit? What Mel Gibson revealed about the LA wildfires on live TV will make you question everything you thought you knew. The camera cuts to a sleek television studio where a polished blonde woman, her warm smile contrasting the gravity of the conversation, leans slightly toward her guest. Her name is Caroline Hart, and her presence alone often assures viewers that everything will be fine. Except today, sitting across from her is Mel Gibson. His expression a curious mix of calm resolve and quiet urgency. The broadcast feels electric even through the screen. Caroline begins, her voice steady but tinged with curiosity. "Mel, you've been vocal about the wildfires tearing through Los Angeles. Your perspective, as always, is intriguing. What is it about this disaster that you feel people are missing for a moment?" Mel doesn't speak. The pause is deliberate, calculated, the weight of his silence almost feels louder than the question. When he finally begins, his voice is low but firm. "Caroline, there's something no one's talking about. Not the media, not the government. No one." The atmosphere in the room changes. Caroline's smile falters, ever so slightly replaced by a faint crease of concern on her forehead behind the scenes. Producers exchange nervous glances. This isn't the kind of conversation they had anticipated. Mel leans forward, his hands resting on his knees as if steadying himself. "The fires, they're not random, there's a pattern." "Caroline, a very specific pattern." Caroline's brow furrows deeper. "A pattern? What kind of pattern are you referring to?" Mel looks directly into the camera, his words deliberately and haunting. "The areas most devastated aren't just wildfire-prone. Their place is tied to something much darker, something orchestrated. I can't sit here and not speak about it anymore." The words hang in the air, the weight of them palpable. Caroline, ever the professional, tries to maintain control of the interview, but her curiosity betrays her. "Are you saying these fires are intentional?" Mel doesn't blink. "Not in the way people think, but they aren't accidents either." The room feels charged. Phones in homes across the country light up as viewers scramble to record what feels like a defining moment. But just as the tension peaks, Mel stops, his expression unreadable. "I'll explain," he says, "but you'll want to hear all of it." But what Mel reveals next is far more disturbing than anyone could have predicted. Mel's revelation lingers as Caroline gathers herself, her professional demeanor barely masking the weight of his words. She presses forward, her voice firm but laced with curiosity. "Let's take a step back. Mel, you've said there's a pattern, but before we get into that, can you talk about what you've observed with these fires?" Mel exhales, leaning back in his chair. His tone shifts, now carrying a somber edge. "Look, Caroline, these fires have torn through entire neighborhoods, places like Pacific Palisades, Malibu, Canyon, Tanga. The destruction isn't just random nature taking its course, it's strategic. These are high-value areas home to billion-dual estates, prime land, and people with power. Images of scorched hillsides and smoldering ruins flash on the screen, scenes that have become tragically familiar. Families standing in disbelief, clutching charred photo albums, firefighters drenched in soot, and pets lost amidst the chaos. Mel gestures toward the screen as if inviting the audience to truly see it. "These fires," he continues, "aren't like the ones I remember from years ago. They're faster, hotter, and far more destructive. It's like they're feeding on something unnatural." Caroline interjects, her tone sharp. "Unnatural? How are you suggesting foul play?" Mel nods slowly, his eyes narrowing. "I've spoken to scientists, firefighters, and locals who've lived in these areas. Their whole lives, they've never seen fires behave like this. It's as if the conditions are being manipulated, accelerated, and the areas hit hardest just so happen to align with land development projects, resource extraction sites, and agendas." The audience at home watches, captivated. Mel's words hit a nerve. echoing questions many had silently harbored but never voiced. Caroline tilts her head, her blonde hair catching the light as she shifts in her seat. "You're saying this. Devastation might not be entirely natural." "Not might?" Mel says, "Flatly, there's no way this is all coincidence, and if you follow the money, because that's what you always have to do, you start to see the threads." But as Mel pulls on these threads, the story starts to unravel in ways no one is prepared for. Caroline leans forward, her polished exterior cracking just enough to reveal genuine intrigue. The studio falls silent, save for the faint hum of equipment in the background. "Mel," she says cautiously, "what threads are you referring to? What have you uncovered?" Mel's gaze hardens and his voice drops a notch, commanding attention. "It started when I noticed the same thing many of us did, how these fires seem to target specific regions. But then I asked myself why. Why are certain areas burning, while others remain untouched? Why is the damage so concentrated?" He pauses, letting the weight of the question sink in. "I started digging." He continues, "I looked into who owns the land, what's planned for it, and who benefits from these areas being cleared, and the answers I found weren't comforting." Caroline's eyebrows knit together. "What did you find? The properties destroyed in Malibu, for example, weren't just homes. They were obstacles. Obstacles to high-value developments, energy projects, and even government initiatives. In one case, land previously tied up in years of environmental protection battles suddenly became wide open for use. Why? Because the fire cleared every single restriction." Caroline glances at her notes, visibly unsettled. "Are you suggesting these fires are being used to bypass environmental laws?" "Exactly," Mel replies, his voice firm, "and it doesn't stop there. I came across records of fire mitigation funds being misused. Developers who quietly acquired burned-out lots for pennies on the dollar, and deals that were signed before the ashes even cooled. Someone somewhere is profiting from this destruction." The air in the studio grows heavy as Mel's words settle over the audience. Caroline presses on her voice, tinged with disbelief. "But Mel, that's a bold claim. Are you saying these fires are intentional?" He leans forward, locking eyes with her. "Not in the way people think. No one's lighting matches. But when you create the conditions for disaster, when you strip funding from fire prevention programs, deregulate industries, and look the other way on climate policies, you might as well be." A murmur spreads among the crew in the studio, barely audible, but palpable. Caroline takes a moment, glancing toward the camera. This is a lot to process." She says, her voice quieter now. "It should be." Mel counters, "because it's not just about wildfires. It's about who controls the narrative and who's allowed to get away with it." But Mel's next revelation will leave even Caroline struggling for words. Caroline studies herself, her carefully maintained professionalism wavering for a moment. "Mel," she says, her voice quieter, "now you've painted a troubling picture, but you're suggesting something bigger than just negligence. Are you saying there's a coordinated effort behind this?" Mel's lips press into a thin line, and he nods. "I've looked into this for months. Caroline, I've followed paper trails, spoken to insiders, and connected the dots. These fires aren't just the result of bad policy or oversight. They're the product of deliberate choices made by people in power." The audience, glued to their screens, likely wonders the same thing as Caroline. Who are these people? Sensing the tension, she leans in. "You're pointing to something systemic. Can you give us specifics?" He exhales deeply. "Let me tell you about one example. There's a massive development project proposed in northern Los Angeles County. A $1 billion dual initiative tied to housing and tech industries. The project stalled for years due to zoning restrictions and environmental protections after the fires swept through, clearing thousands of acres. Those restrictions vanished almost overnight." Caroline's mouth opens slightly, her composure slipping. As the implications sink in, "Are you saying these fires are clearing the way for development projects?" "Yes," Mel says without hesitation. And not just there. The same thing is happening in Ventura County and parts of Napa Valley. Prime land suddenly opened for development, and it's not just private companies. Some of these projects have government backing. It's a perfect storm of profit, power, and destruction. Caroline tries to regain control, her voice firming up. But surely these are coincidences. Mel fires happen every year, especially in California. How can you be certain there's intent behind this? He leans closer, his voice steady but charged. Because of what happens after the fires, developers are end up ready to buy land before the smoke even clears, and the laws meant to protect these areas. They get pushed aside as if they never existed. Someone is profiting from this devastation, Caroline, and they don't want us asking why. The camera cuts briefly to a shot of the scorched landscapes, the imagery underscoring Mel's point. Caroline's voice falters slightly as she responds, "Mel, this is hard to hear. You're accusing powerful people of exploiting a tragedy." "I'm not accusing them," Mel says sharply. "I'm stating facts, and the people watching this, they need to start asking questions too." But the next layer of Mel's revelation turns the conversation from troubling to outright shocking. The interview ends, but the conversation is far from over within hours. Clips from Mel's appearance flood social media. The hashtags Bucker, Mel Gibson reveals, and #Wildfire Truth trend across platforms, sparking an avalanche of reactions. Some viewers are quick to dismiss Mel's claims as conspiracy theories, but others begin to dig deeper. They post satellite images, zoning maps, and articles that seem to align with what Mel had said. Threads unravel on forums, connecting dots that were previously ignored. One user writes, "Look at the land auctions right after the fires. It's all prime real estate scooped up by the same few companies." Coincidence? Major news outlets pick up the story. Some dismiss it, outright calling it Hollywood sensationalism, while others cautiously investigate. A late-night host jokes, "Mel Gibson thinks he's cracked the case of the century next. He'll be telling us the fires are aliens warming up their engines." The audience laughs, but online the discourse is no joke. Survivors of the fires weigh in, sharing their stories. A woman named Teresa speaks through tears in a viral video. "Our home was one of the first to go. We had just rebuilt after the last fire, and now a month later we're getting offers from developers to sell the land. It feels like they were waiting for this." The backlash grows louder as corporations tied to recent land acquisitions are called out. A leaked memo from one real estate firm becomes a lightning rod for outrage. It reads potential opportunities in post-fire redevelopment zones. The public doesn't miss the cold calculation behind those words. Caroline Hart, the blonde host from the interview, finds herself in the spotlight as well. In an unplanned follow-up segment, she addresses the flood of reactions when Mel Gibson spoke. "I didn't expect the response we're seeing now, but these questions deserve answers, and I hope someone in power is brave enough to give them." Despite the growing uproar, silence persists from those implicated politicians. Sidestep questions, corporations issue vague statements about supporting wildfire recovery, and the media's coverage remains cautious. But the public isn't letting go this time, and when a new piece of evidence emerges, it pushes the controversy to an entirely new level. The story takes an even more personal turn when wildfire survivors begin sharing their experiences in greater detail. Among them is Daniel Reyes, a retired firefighter who spent decades battling blazes across California. His voice shakes as he speaks. In a heartfelt interview with an independent journalist, "I've fought fires my whole life," Daniel says, staring at the blackened remains of his home in Malibu Canyon. "But this one, it wasn't normal. Fires don't spread that fast or burn that hot without help. The winds were fierce, sure, but the way it moved, it was like it had a mind of its own." And now, knowing what Mel said, I can't help but wonder if someone wanted this to happen. Daniel's story resonates deeply, and it's not the only one. A single Mother named Regina lost her home and her livelihood in the fires. "They say it's nature," she says in a viral video, her voice raw with emotion. But how is it nature when a week later I'm getting calls from a company offering to buy my land? Who are these people? And how did they know to contact me so fast? These stories fuel a new wave of anger and sadness. People begin to connect, not only with the mystery, but also with the human cost videos of charred family heirlooms, burned-out schools, and displaced animals flood social media. But amidst the pain, something else begins to take root. A call for accountability. Grassroots organizations spring up demanding investigations into the fires and the policies surrounding wildfire prevention. Activists hold rallies in Sacramento calling out the corporations and lawmakers named in Mel's interview, signs reading, "Fire doesn't lie, but greed does, and who profits?" From the ashes are carried by crowds demanding answers. Caroline Hart takes to the airwaves once more, this time with a fire in her tone. It's clear that people are hurting and angry, and rightfully so. But this is more than anger. It's a chance to change the way we look at disasters and how we let those in power respond. To them, her words ignite further momentum, but they also draw opposition. Critics label the movement as anti-business or wild conspiracy theories, while others accuse Mel Gibson of grandstanding. Yet the voices calling for justice refuse to be silenced. And just as the tension reaches its peak, an insider steps forward with proof that changes everything. As public outrage reaches a boiling point, a surprising development shakes the conversation to its core. An anonymous whistleblower, someone who claims to have worked closely with a prominent land development corporation, steps forward with damning evidence in a video posted to an independent news site. Their voice is distorted, and their face is obscured. The person, identified only as Alex, holds up a stack of documents. These are internal memos, emails, and project plans. Alex says they show that the company I worked for knew these fires were coming and planned their moves around them. The whistleblower highlights one email chain in particular. The subject line reads, "Post-fire acquisition strategy." The emails detailed plans to target specific parcels of land once they became available after wildfire damage. One chilling line stands out: "When the fires clear the path, we move fast." Timing is everything. The reaction is immediate and explosive. News outlets race to verify the documents, and within hours they're confirmed as authentic. The corporation named in the leak denies any wrongdoing, but cannot explain the incriminating language. A spokesperson issues a vague statement. "These emails taken out of context do not reflect our commitment to ethical practices and community rebuilding," but the public isn't buying it. Protests erupt outside the company's headquarters, with demonstrators demanding resignations and accountability. Social media lights up with hashtags like #HatFiresForProfit and #ExposeTheGreed. Even lawmakers who had previously remained silent begin to take notice. Mel Gibson, watching the chaos unfold, releases a brief statement. "This was never about me, it's about the truth. And now we have it." Caroline Hart dedicates an entire episode of her show to the whistleblower's evidence, inviting legal experts and environmental activists to weigh. In one guest, a seasoned prosecutor sums it up. "If these documents are accurate, they point to criminal negligence at best and outright corruption. At worst, the outrage intensifies when more whistleblowers step forward corroborating Alex's claims." One former employee of a state agency admits on live television, "We were pressured to approve permits for redevelopment in areas we knew were still recovering. We were told it was for the greater good." But even as the truth comes to light, the fight for justice is only beginning. The revelations from the whistleblowers spark a cascade of investigations. Federal agencies, once reluctant to act now, face immense press pressure to hold those responsible. Accountable congressional hearings are announced, with corporate executives and government officials called to testify under oath. The public's demand for justice transcends political divides. People from all walks of life rally behind a simple but profound idea: no one should profit from destruction. Grassroots movements flourish, and petitions for stronger wildfire prevention policies and stricter corporate regulations gather millions of signatures. Mel Gibson, who had sparked this national reckoning, remains measured in his response. In a candid interview months later, he reflects on the journey: "I didn't come forward to make waves." He says, "I did it."